A weary single father stood in the middle of his broken-down gold mine, his clothes soaked in mud and his hands shaking from exhaustion. All around him came the painful noise of machines shutting down, one after another. Instead of the golden shine he had dreamed of, the pit was filled with nothing but water, mud, and fading hopes. He had stepped into mining with a pure dream, a dream that one day this land would give him enough gold to secure the future of his children. But instead of blessings, the mine had brought him endless struggles. His heart was breaking, and his strength was slipping away. Still, even in the lowest moment, he could not forget the promise he had made to his children that he would fight until his last breath to give them a better life. This man was not born into wealth, nor had he ever been given an easy path. Life had already taken away his wife, leaving him to raise his children alone. Every single day, when the sun rose, he thought not about himself but about the little faces waiting for him at home. He worked anywhere he could: fields, construction, factories, just to earn enough for food and shelter. But the cost of life never stopped. The children's education suffered, their dreams often remained out of reach, and it tore him apart to know he could not give them everything they deserved. That pain became the fire that pushed him toward mining. It was a risky gamble, but he believed it could be his last chance to turn life around. With hope in his heart, he poured every bit of his savings into a small claim. In the beginning, the sound of digging filled him with energy. He would imagine gold shining in his pan and think of his children smiling. For him, mining was never about wealth, it was about keeping his promise. But as days turned into weeks and weeks into months, reality revealed its cruelty. The machines he had bought with his hard-earned savings began failing. Excavators broke down, conveyors stopped, and trommels jammed over and over again. Every repair drained what little money he had left. If that wasn't enough, the land itself turned against him. Water seeped into the mine every single day, flooding the pit. Pumps fought endlessly, but it was like trying to empty a lake with a cup. The mud grew thicker, the walls grew weaker, and the hope of gold kept slipping further away. Sometimes, the father would stand silently at the edge of the flooded pit, staring into the murky water and wondering if he had made the biggest mistake of his life. Instead of giving his children a brighter future, this mine was threatening to destroy what little they had. The workers, too, were losing their spirit. Their faces carried fatigue, frustration, and despair. The mine, once a place of hope, had become nothing short of a nightmare. And just when everything seemed to collapse for good, the sound of engines echoed at the sight. The familiar figures stepped out of their vehicles: Freddy Dodge and Juan Ibarra. In the mining world, their names were spoken with respect, known as troubleshooters and problem solvers. These two had revived mines that others had declared dead. The crew felt an instant spark of hope. Whispers spread quickly: if anyone can save this mine, it's Freddy and Juan. Even the father, who had almost surrendered to despair, felt a faint glow of belief return. Perhaps this was not the end after all. Freddy's sharp eyes immediately scanned the pit, while Juan moved straight to the broken machines. The sight was worse than they had imagined. The pit was half filled with water, pumps were struggling, and the excavators looked more like piles of scrap than working machines. Juan examined the trommel, his face tight with concern. Belts were worn out, parts were cracked, and urgent welding was needed just to make it run again. Looking at the father, Juan said honestly, "These machines won't last long." The words stung, but they were the truth. Meanwhile, Freddy crouched down, scooped up a handful of dirt, and began panning. A few tiny flakes of gold appeared, but far too little. He looked at the father and said, "This won't be easy. We'll need to work both hard and smart to change this." His words carried weight difficult to hear, but filled with determination. That moment marked the beginning of the true fight. Freddy and Juan were not just battling a broken mine. They were fighting for the future of a father and his children. Together with the crew, they laid out a plan. The first battle was against water. Extra pumps would need to be set up and a drainage system built to push the water out. Without fixing that, everything else would be useless. Next came the machines. Buying new parts was impossible, so one had to get creative. Welding, patching, reusing scraps, anything that could keep them alive for a few more weeks. And finally, Freddy studied the soil carefully and proposed a new mining strategy. They would dig at a different angle and go deeper, aiming for the richer layers hidden underground. It was risky. If they were wrong, all their work would be wasted. But if they were right, it could be the miracle they were searching for. The father listened quietly, fear and hope mixing in his heart. Then, after a long pause, he said the words that set everything in motion: "Let's take the risk." From that moment, the atmosphere changed. Pumps roared as water was drained. Workers carried pipes, dug trenches, and forced the water out step by step. At night, sparks lit the sky as Juan welded broken parts, his face glowing with sweat and fire. Slowly, the machines rumbled back to life, their sounds like music after weeks of silence. Freddy's strategy was put into action, and digging began in a new direction. Every bucket of dirt held suspense. Would it reveal gold or just more mud? The father stood near the machines, his heart pounding with every clunk, every vibration. For him, this was not just about mining, it was about survival, about his children's tomorrow. Days passed with constant tension. Sometimes gold appeared, lifting spirits, only to be crushed again when a machine failed or water surged back into the pit. The father's emotions rose and fell with the mind flashes of joy quickly drowned by fresh waves of despair. The crew, too, was nearing exhaustion. But one evening, the father gathered them all. With tears streaming down his face, he told them this was not just a fight for gold, but a fight for his children's future. His voice trembled, but carried a truth that pierced their hearts. He reminded them that together they were not just workers. They were a family fighting for something greater than themselves. That night, the crew's spirits reignited. The next morning, everyone worked with renewed determination. Water was drained, machines patched together, and soil sifted again. For the first time in weeks, golden flakes began to appear more regularly. Smiles returned to the crew, and the father's eyes glistened as he held small pieces of gold in his hands. To him, they were not just minerals, they were pieces of his children's future. But mining is never free from danger. Just when hope began to bloom, disaster struck. The trommel jammed with a deafening screech, halting everything. At the same time, rain poured down, flooding the pit all over again. Pumps failed, water rose fast, and fear gripped the workers. The father froze, watching his dream sink once more. But Freddy and Juan stayed calm. This was the moment they were made for. Juan climbed into the broken trommel, welding with whatever scraps he could find. Sparks flew as he battled against the jam. Meanwhile, Freddy rallied the crew, dividing them into teams to fight the flooding. Shovels, hoses, buckets, everything was thrown into the fight. Hours passed in chaos, but finally, the machine roared back to life. The crew erupted in cheers, relief spreading across the site. Work resumed, and soon soil poured through the system once more. And then it happened, the miracle they had been waiting for. First came the flakes, then came the bigger pieces, and finally, gleaming nuggets appeared in the pans. The crew shouted in joy, hugging one another. The father fell to his knees, clutching the gold in his hands as tears streamed down his face. "This is the future of my children," he whispered. That simple sentence carried the weight of the entire journey. Weeks of fear, hardship, and struggle had finally paid off. Freddy and Juan exchanged quiet smiles. They had done it again, not just by saving a mine, but by saving a man's dream. The pit, once filled with silence and despair, now echoed with laughter and victory. The father's children would have a future because their father never gave up, and because two men refused to let hope die. This was not just about gold. It was about survival, faith, and the power of never surrendering. And as the machines kept running and the crew celebrated, one thought remained in everyone's mind. If this miracle could happen here, what other stories of struggle and triumph wait in the mines of tomorrow? The celebration did not last long. Though the crew had struck gold, everyone knew the mine was still fragile. Machines were patched together with scraps, pumps ran nonstop against the water, and storms could return at any moment. Freddy reminded the father gently, "This isn't the finish line, it's just the beginning." The father nodded. For the first time in months, he had hope in his eyes, but he also understood the fight was not over. He gathered his children that evening, showing them the small nuggets of gold. Their little hands touched the shining pieces, their faces lighting up with joy. They didn't see just metal, they saw their father's promise becoming real. The father's heart swelled, but inside, he knew he had to push harder. This small victory had to grow into something lasting. The next morning, the real grind began. Freddy and Juan sat down with the father and laid out a longer-term plan. Step 1. Secure the drainage system. Without keeping the water out, every success would keep slipping away. Step 2. Stabilize the machines. Welding patches could only hold for so long, so they needed reliable fixes, even if it meant building parts by hand. And Step 3. Improve efficiency. The way the dirt was being processed wasted time and energy. Freddy had ideas to redesign the flow, so the gold recovery would be faster. The father listened carefully, soaking in every word. This was more than technical advice, it was survival strategy. He realized that Freddy and Juan weren't just saving his mind. They were teaching him how to stand tall, to fight smarter, and to build something that could truly last. The following weeks tested everyone's limits. Under Freddy's guidance, trenches were dug deeper, channels redirected, and the water problem was slowly brought under control. The pit, once a swamp of despair, began to dry out. Juan worked like a man possessed. Every night sparks from his welding torch lit up the darkness, and every morning the machines groaned back to life under his repairs. His hands were blistered, but his determination was unshakable. And then came the turning point. With the water under control and the machines running steady, Freddy shifted the mining strategy once more. He directed the crew toward a section of the claim most people had overlooked, an area that looked unpromising on the surface, but, based on his years of experience, could hide something deeper. The workers hesitated. It looked like a gamble, another risk when they were already stretched thin. But the father, remembering his promise to his children, stood tall. "We take the chance," he said firmly. The digging began. Bucket after bucket, truckload after truckload, the soil was processed. At first, results were small, tiny flakes, just enough to keep hope alive. But then, as the days passed, the gold became richer. Pan after pan revealed not only flakes, but small nuggets. Excitement spread through the crew like wildfire. Smiles returned to faces that had once been dulled by despair. The father worked alongside them, shoulder to shoulder, his body aching, but his spirit soaring. Every speck of gold reminded him of bedtime stories he told his children about brighter days ahead. And now, those stories were slowly becoming real. But mining is unforgiving. Just when hope felt strongest, disaster loomed again. A violent storm swept across the valley. Rain hammered down, lightning lit up the sky, and water rushed back into the pit with terrifying speed. Pumps strained, machines shook, and the crew scrambled in panic. The father's worst fear returned, the fear of losing everything in a single night. This time, though, things were different. He wasn't alone. Freddy barked orders, organizing the crew into teams, each one handling a critical task. Juan, soaked to the bone, dove under the machines to keep them alive as water threatened to drown them out. The father joined the fight, hauling hoses, digging trenches, and shouting encouragement to his men. The storm raged on, but instead of breaking, the crew stood united. Hours passed. The pit filled dangerously high. Pumps screamed. Mudslides threatened to collapse the walls. And then, just when it seemed the mine would be swallowed whole, the storm broke. The rain slowed, the clouds began to clear, and sunlight pierced through. Exhausted, covered in mud, and dripping wet, the crew stood victorious. The mine had survived. That night, the father sat quietly with Freddy and Juan by the fire. He looked at them, his voice breaking with emotion. "I could never have done this without you. You didn't just save my mind, you saved my family." Freddy, always humble, shook his head. "You did this. We just helped. A man who fights for his children can't be defeated." Juan nodded in agreement, wiping grease from his hands. "Your kids will grow up knowing their father never gave up on them. That's worth more than any gold." The father's eyes filled with tears. He knew the road ahead was still long, that mining would never be easy. But now he also knew something he had forgotten: he was not alone. With knowledge, teamwork, and faith, even the darkest pits could shine with hope. The next morning, the mine looked different, not because the mud had disappeared or the machines had suddenly turned new, but because hope was now alive on that ground. The crew, once weighed down by despair, now carried themselves with pride. They were no longer just laborers in a failing pit, they were fighters, standing shoulder to shoulder with a father who refused to quit. Freddy gathered the crew at sunrise. His voice was calm but firm. "What we did last night proves something important. This mine is not cursed. It's tough, yes, but it can be saved. If we stick together, we'll not only pull gold out of this ground, but we'll pull life back into it." The men nodded, determination burning in their eyes. Juan, already smeared with grease, climbed onto the trommel and shouted, "Let's make these machines sing again." The crew erupted in cheers. For the first time in months, laughter echoed across the mine. The father watched, silently smiling. Inside, his heart was full. For so long, he had carried the burden alone. Now, for the first time, he felt the weight lifting, not because the struggle was gone, but because he no longer carried it by himself. Over the next days, the site transformed. Juan turned broken scraps into working parts. He welded until sparks rained like fireflies in the night. He passed leaking hoses with tape and wire, and somehow they held. Machines that had once sounded like dying beasts now roared with new life. Freddy, meanwhile, spent hours studying the ground. He walked the claim with maps in hand, testing dirt samples, panning riverside gravel, and digging deeper into layers others had ignored. His instincts told him there was richer gold beneath the stubborn mud, and he was determined to find it. The crew followed his lead, digging carefully in the new direction. Load after load of soil poured into the plant. At first, it was discouraging, just flakes, nothing more. But Freddy urged them on. Don't lose faith. We're getting closer. Then, on the fourth day, it happened. In the cleaned-up tray, among the usual dust and fine specks, something larger glistened. A nugget not huge, but big enough to catch every eye. The crew froze for a moment, stunned into silence. Then cheers erupted. Men slapped each other on the back, and even the father's face broke into a grin wider than anyone had seen before. That nugget wasn't just gold, it was proof. Proof that the gamble was paying off. Proof that Freddy's instincts were right. Proof that the mine was alive. The discovery lit a fire under everyone. Work became faster, sharper, more focused. Every man moved with renewed purpose. Buckets were filled with care, soil washed with precision, and gold recovery carefully monitored. Slowly but surely, more nuggets appeared, small but steady. At night, round the fire, the crew began to talk again, not about defeat, but about dreams. One worker spoke of sending money back to his family. Another spoke of repairing his house. And the father, though quiet, thought only of his children's future. He pictured them in school uniforms, smiling, learning, growing into a life he had always wished for them. But as always in mining, fortune has a cruel way of testing the brave. Just when the momentum was building, disaster returned, this time in the form of a collapse. One afternoon, as the excavator dug deeper along the pit wall, the soaked mud gave way. A landslide roared down, burying part of the site in seconds. The ground shook, machines lurched, and men scattered. Dust filled the air. When the noise settled, silence fell. The crew looked around in shock. Thankfully, no one was hurt, but part of the pit was gone, collapsed under the weight of water and mud. The father stood frozen, staring at the destruction. His chest felt heavy. It was as if the mine was mocking him again, reminding him how fragile hope could be. He clenched his fists, ready to give up. But before despair could take root, Freddy's voice cut through the silence. "This is not the end," Freddy said firmly. "We'll dig around it. We'll go safer, smarter. A wall can collapse, but our will cannot." The crew, still shaken, found strength in his words. Juan inspected the machines for damage, reassuring everyone that they could still push forward. Slowly, the fear faded. Work resumed, not out of desperation this time, but out of resilience. The father, though shaken, realized something important. In the past, a disaster like this would have broken him completely. But now, with Freddy, Juan, and his crew at his side, he no longer felt crushed. For the first time in years, he truly believed he could win. And so, the fight continued. Day after day, they battled mud, machines, and exhaustion. Some days brought only tiny flakes of gold. Other days revealed small but shining nuggets. Progress was slow, but it was steady. Finally, after weeks of backbreaking work, the big cleanup arrived. Buckets of concentrate were poured onto the mats. Every pan was washed with anticipation. The crew huddled close, eyes wide, breaths held. Then came the moment of truth. The mats gleamed with gold. Not just flakes, not just small pieces, but a rich line of shining yellow stretching across the tray. The crew erupted in celebration. Some shouted, some hugged, others simply stared in disbelief. The father dropped to his knees, his hands trembling as he touched the glowing line of gold. Tears streamed down his face. This is for my children," he whispered. Freddy smiled, satisfied but humble. Juan wiped the sweat from his brow, grinning ear to ear. The crew lifted their voices, the mine echoing with laughter and victory. That night, the father returned home with a small pouch of gold. Hep listed in his chill. Home with a small pouch of gold. Hep listed in his chill. Children's hands. Their eyes lit up as though they were holding stars. For them, it was not just treasure, it was proof of their father's love, his sacrifice, his unshakable will. The mine was no longer a place of despair. It had become a symbol of resilience, a battlefield where hope had triumphed against all odds. And though Freddy and Juan would soon move on to the next desperate site, their legacy here would never be forgotten. They had not only saved a failing mine, they had saved a father's promise. The gold pulled from the ground would eventually run out, as it always does. But the lessons of courage, unity, and determination would remain forever. Because in the end, this was never just a story about mining. It was a story about a father's love dot in the heart of the rugged wilderness, where hope is often buried deeper than gold. One desperate father struggles to keep his failing mine alive. With his children's future hanging by a thread, he faces collapsing walls, broken machines, and endless storms. Just when it seems all is lost, mighty legends Freddy and Juan arrive not only to rescue a dying mine, but to reignite a father's fight for his family's survival. The air was thick with mud and despair as the father stood alone, staring at the flooded pit that had swallowed his dreams. Every drop of water rising inside the mine felt like time running out, each broken machine a reminder of how close he was to losing everything. His children's faces haunted his thoughts, their small voices echoing in his mind, pushing him to hold on just a little longer. But the mine was unforgiving, and his strength was slipping away. Then, like a faint light breaking through storm clouds, the sound of engines approached. Two men, known across the mining world for turning disaster into hope, stepped onto the broken ground. Freddy Dodge and Juan Ibarra had come, and with them came a chance to turn despair into survival, and maybe even transform a father's promise into reality. The father could hardly believe his eyes as Freddy and Juan walked toward him. For weeks, he had battled alone against mud, water, and machines that refused to stay alive. His workers were tired, their spirits broken, and even he had nearly surrendered to the weight of failure. But now, standing in front of him were the very men who had saved countless miners before. Their presence alone breathed a spark of life into the sight. The crew straightened their backs, whispers spread through the camp, and for the first time in months, hope felt real. Freddy's eyes scanned the mine like a soldier studying a battlefield, while Juan crouched beside the machines, his hands brushing over cracked metal and worn-out belts. They didn't waste time on empty promises. They saw the pain, they felt the urgency, and they knew what was at stake. This was not just another mine to them. It was a family's lifeline, a father's last chance to keep his promise to his children. The mine looked more like a graveyard than a place of hope. Rusted steel groaned under its own weight, and the mud swallowed boots whole with every step. The father had poured every drop of strength into this land, but the earth refused to give back. Now, standing across from Freddy and Juan, he felt the thin line between despair and belief. His voice was low, heavy with exhaustion, as he told them how he had mortgaged his future for this claim. He spoke of his children, of nights where he came home empty-handed, unable to hide the shame in his eyes. Freddy listened in silence, his arms crossed, his gaze sharp. Juan's brow furrowed as he studied the broken trommel. The weight of the father's words hung in the air, but the silence was not one of hopelessness. It was the silence of men calculating a plan, men who had been here before and pulled miracles from rubble. The mine looked more like a graveyard than a place of hope. Rusted steel groaned under its own weight, and the mud swallowed boots whole with every step. The father had poured every drop of strength into this land, but the earth refused to give back. Now, standing across from Freddy and Juan, he felt the thin line between despair and belief. His voice was low, heavy with exhaustion, as he told them how he had mortgaged his future for this claim. He spoke of his children, of nights where he came home empty-handed, unable to hide the shame in his eyes. Freddy listened in silence, his arms crossed, his gaze sharp. Juan's brow furrowed as he studied the broken trommel. The weight of the father's words hung in the air, but the silence was not one of hopelessness. It was the silence of men calculating a plan, men who had been here before and pulled miracles from rubble. The first step was survival. The pit was drowning under relentless water, and no amount of courage could fight a flood without machines. Pumps had to be fixed, trenches dug, water pushed away before it swallowed everything whole. Freddy explained the plan with calm precision, outlining what needed to be done. His words carried authority, but also reassurance, as if he were telling the father, "You are not alone anymore." Juan, meanwhile, rolled up his sleeves and got to work. Welding sparks lit the night sky as he patched broken frames, replaced torn belts, and pieced together machines with nothing but scrap and determination. The father watched, almost in disbelief, as lifeless equipment groaned, coughed, and then roared back to life under Juan's hands. The crew, once beaten down, felt a rush of energy. They were not just fixing metal, they were reviving hope. Men shouted instructions, water sprayed from hoses, and the pit slowly began to breathe again. For every gallon of water that poured out, It was as if despair itself was being drained. The father worked alongside them, mud clinging to his clothes, sweat burning his eyes. But this time, his steps were light.